everyone? Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Good evening, Rush Nation, and welcome to the Dynasty Show. We've got a super exciting show for you this evening. To start off with, Dan and I are finally back together hosting.
Yeah, I know.
In a few weeks, hasn't it, Dan? But
it's been a little while, yeah.
Everything going okay with you?
Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there slowly. So I've had a change of jobs and so on. New job starts on Monday. So, yeah, it's all good. Yeah.
And you may have noticed if you're watching on the stream, we do have a special guest with us this evening. We, of course, have Kevin Coleman. He is at theboys22 on Twitter. Is there an underscore in there, Kevin, or have I
yeah, there's an underscore in there. Someone actually has that. I've been trying to talk to Elon about getting that fixed, but no, the guy hasn't tweeted for like 5 years. But yeah, it's _22.
Oh, well,
she did so well checking the name, the affiliations, and everything. So you didn't offend him, Hannah. And in the first line of the thing, you got his Twitter handle.
Failed. I know, it's a disaster, isn't it? But maybe Kevin will be at theboys22 soon because we know that Elon's chucking a load of people out. So I might be right in a few weeks' time, right? And Kevin, of course, you're affiliated with the Football Guys and the Devy Royale. And I also have to mention that you got the Tags Rising Star Award. So you are one of the greats in the community. We're really excited to have you on, and thank you so much for coming on tonight. What have you been up to recently?
Oh man, just finishing the school year as a teacher, so I've just been enjoying that. And then as far as content goes, just kind of diving back into it and doing a bunch of spotlights and YouTube videos and stuff like that. You know how it is; it keeps you busy, and just trying to figure out the year and kind of getting that lull of like, all right, I'm going to take a little bit of break, but now I'm back into it. I'm excited about talking fantasy.
Yeah, of course. I think we're all kind of gearing up now, aren't we, as the season gets going. College season's coming, NFL season's coming, and we're all kind of chomping at the bit, I guess, to get going, right? So obviously, like the 2023 season, the 2023 draft is not long finished really, and it feels like it was only a couple of weeks ago that we were chatting draft, all of those rookies, where they're going to fit, where they're going to go, and how everything's going to kind of pan out for this season. But already I'm hearing loads and loads of chatter within the Dynasty community about the 2024 class. You know, oh, I'm really excited for the class, or, you know, I've got these picks I want to trade, or so I think it seems like a good time really to take a peek into that class really and find out who might be coming into the NFL, what kind of, I suppose, caliber of players we're looking at, how excited we should be getting, how we should be kind of valuing our 24 picks. And so, Kevin, I thought you would be the perfect person really to come in and chat about that. You know, with your work with the Devy Royale and everything. I know you've got tons of knowledge on these guys, so I thought you'd be the perfect guy to kind of steal some information on and share with our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. I wouldn't say perfect, above average. We don't go for perfect on over here. It creates too many expectations.
You're selling yourself short, Kevin. You're selling yourself short.
It creates too many expectations. So I go above average. I kind of know these guys. I've been diving into we'll talk about it later, but you know, in terms of like how does Dynasty and Devy kind of intermix and how do you rank these guys and stuff like that. So we've been doing a lot of work this offseason focusing on that. So I'm pretty in tune with the Dynasty space and like how these things are getting valued.
I'd say you've not been around too long in the Dynasty. Same for me, it feels like we get to this stage of every year, and the next year's draft class is always the best one that's coming. And am I right, Kevin? It's always the next year's class that is always the best. Like you get over the hype, and then you start looking ahead. How many times did people this time last year bulk up on 2023 rookie picks in their leagues? And they've got there and gone, I wish I had 2024 picks. And I can guarantee next May they'll wish they had 2025 picks because that's just the way it goes.
That's the space, man. That's what it is. I mean, I think the thing too is like the way people have built dynasty rosters has definitely changed. So like it used to be all about youth, and it somewhat is that too, but like they think picks for sure things. And then what we've seen the last couple of years is Those things are not sure things anymore. And so I think we have seen a shift in kind of the mindset. But yeah, I've already seen the takes. Like 24 is better. I saw that like probably in April. And like, it's like, hey, can we just enjoy one class at a time? Let's just kind of go through. Like, there's value to be had in all these guys' classes. But you know how people are. They're fickle beasts. They are fickle, and they just want what's new, what's new, what's new. They're like my kids. Like, what are we doing now? It's like, we just went to Disneyland, or we just did this. What are you talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's next. I want to look forward to the next thing, isn't it? Yeah. So based on that, Kevin, what are your general thoughts on this 2024 class? Is it the best class ever, or are people getting
it's the best class since the last class?
Yeah, so like I as far as like this class goes, in my notes, but also just in general, I think it has 3 elite players. So you're looking at like Caleb Williams at quarterback, and quarterback is a tough one because, he plays at USC, he won the Heisman last year, for those of you that don't know, and he's getting value probably as like a dynasty top 10 quarterback already before he got drafted, before he's even coming out. Now, as far as like him as a prospect, he's got some things to work on. And quarterbacks are really hard. They're hard to judge. You've seen it with Malik Willis. You saw it with Sam Howell. You see it with these guys. But Caleb is about as sure as a prospect as you would expect. Like, okay, we know this guy's going to probably be valued here. He's probably going to go 1. Then you have elite wide receiver, Marvin Harrison Jr. He's an absolute stud. If you haven't watched him play, I recommend going out there and watching some Ohio State games. He's a pretty sure – I'd be shocked if he didn't go top 5 in the NFL draft next year. Like, that is kind of the value he's have out there in circles. And he's getting valued right now anywhere between like dynasty wide receiver 3 to 8 in combined rankings. Like, he is very high. And then maybe a top possible tight end, Brock Bowers, as like a top 5 guy. But that's just because the tight end position sucks, as you guys know. Like, it is so hard to like, you think these guys are going to produce at high levels. And I have some question marks about Bowers and others don't. But as a whole, like, there's a lot of question marks in this class, and there's value. The thing is with this class is the running backs. So like last year, everybody talked about the 2023 running backs, and then they didn't really pan out. Like, they kind of did. There was some that got draft capital this year and people were excited about, but we don't have a Bijan Robinson in this class. It could be Travion Henderson from Ohio State, but it really, the class as a whole is going to come down to how well those running backs produce and where we see that. Because if they don't do very well, because there's like 4 or 5 question marks for each one of these guys, this class would be very shallow. I think the top 5 picks you really like in this class, and you'd be happy with that. But as far as like, I did a 24 mock recently, and the first running back taken was at the 109. So that goes to tell you kind of what the value is at that position. Now, if they hit though, then you're looking at probably, again, like, 101 to 110 is where you really want to be. But, there's a lot, they got to work themselves out. There's a lot of question marks after the top guys at each position, and even at running back for the number 1.
And how much do you think this is kind of going to play out over the course of this season, really? Do you think that, the elite guys are going to stay in the elite tier? I know lots can happen, injuries, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, how much do you think is going to play out this season, and how much do you think we're kind of going to have to see how they go on in the NFL kind of thing?
So, I'm very like cautious about this in terms of I've shifted my tone the last few years as you gain knowledge of how these things work themselves out. There's only 2 players that I'm like, yeah, they're going to be dynasty assets I'd want. That's Marvin Harrison Jr. and Caleb Williams. After that, there is a significant tier break of like, where is these guys' values going to shift? And it's kind of, I call it the Kayshon Boutte factor. Kayshon Boutte for 3 years was an elite wide receiver, and then he went in the 6th round of the Patriots. And whatever you think of, that, or Zach Evans, 6 rounds to the Rams, he was getting touted as like a 108, 107. So there is a ton of question marks. And that is also why I've shifted a lot my dynasty, how I strategize and how I kind of attack drafts is I don't care about picks as much anymore. Unless it's like a top 5 and I think it's value there, I will move picks more now than I ever have to get that immediate production. I think part of that is because people just they want to build, but they don't want to win. Like, I see that so much in leagues. And if you look at your leagues, if you went through like how many are rebuilding and how many are competing, it's like 3 people. So there's always a market to go out there, make the playoffs, and try to win money. And so that's how I kind of look at that. As far as the class, yeah, it's 2 guys that I'm really like, yeah, those guys are elite players. After that, there's a ton of question marks, and I'm not going to bank on them hitting at their ceiling just so I can kind of rebuild anyway. And that's just not how I kind of build my teams anymore.
So in terms of value of picks, you're almost shying away from them for 2024 at this stage then? unless they're really early considerations.
So yeah, I would say this though, like if someone, you know how it is, everybody always like thinks they're gonna get Caleb Williams in their picks. Like everybody that trades at first is like, oh, that's gonna be Caleb Williams, and then it turns into, you know, Will Levis at the 111 or whatever the case may be. So like I use that as a barometer. Like if I'm holding a first that people deem to be top 5, then I'm gonna use that first to go get an elite asset because they think they're gonna get either Marvin Harrison Jr. or Caleb or whatever. And that's kind of how I utilize picks now. It's not so much like, I think one thing that early dynasty managers do this when they start it, they assign their picks to players as soon as this year. Like, oh, well, I have a top 5 guy. That's going to be Marvin. He'll look great on this roster. And that's not how that's not how you should kind of build. So I just look at it pure value, and I'll give Jay Stein credit. He works for Football Guys with me. He's an analytics guy. I am not analytics, so don't throw any numbers at me, but he is. That's his thing. He loves it. But he's really changed my idea of like just assigning value. It's strict value. And then as you look at the picks, it's just how can I manipulate this value to get the player that I want in Dynasty? And I have a trade calculator essentially in my own rankings of like, all right, this is where I value this pick at. If I can get any of these assets in this tier, I'm going to do it because that is kind of the value of it. And then I tier up or whatever the case may be. But yeah, as a whole, yeah, I tend to just look at them as value. I don't look at as players and I think that's what devy does wrong too. Like devy is not about who the best players are. The reason why people struggle in devy is because they always think that they're smarter than NFL scouts. We are not. Like we are not smarter than NFL scouts. So like the way that you play devy is, you need to know who to avoid and how to extract value. Those are the 2 biggest points of like having any type of fantasy for college is who the hell do you avoid? Like I was a big off of like Kyron Williams 2 years ago, Sean Tucker this last year. Like I was off those guys, and in where to get out when you need to get out and how to extract value. That's kind of how you should play devy, the format as a whole, as college, more than dynasty.
See, I'm in devy leagues, and I'm just going to jump in a little bit and go off a little because Kevin's here and I want to pick his brain. I'm in a devy league, but devy leagues are for knowledge-based purposes, effectively. So it's getting me familiar with the college guys and so on. The one thing I find even difficult, even myself, is the valuing of those, because we've mentioned already, the hit rate on rookie picks isn't wonderful past anything mid-first onwards. So how does that compare to a devy pick? And then how do you value that?
Okay, so what I try to do, because I get this question a lot, and let's say, so you're in a devy league, it's kind of depleted your rookie draft or whatever the case may be. If it's a combined rookie and devy draft that has a little bit more value, just because of the incoming freshman, but let's say it's separate, I just look at like, so early first to me are like mid to late first. So like I try to appropriate the value based on probably how many guys are going to be gone, because there's always a Javonte, there's always a Zach Wilson, there's always these guys that kind of pop out of nowhere. Joe Burrow, for example, was one of the one in I started a devy league that we're still going, and that year we did a 10-round devy draft. Joe Burrow did not get drafted in the 10 rounds. So he was available at the 101 the next year because no one really thought Joe Burrow was going to be Joe Burrow. So yeah, what I do is I kind of, early first and depleted drafts, I look at it as mid to late first, and then like mid first are like early seconds. And so that's kind of how I correlate that value. And it is hard. It's super hard to do. But that's just how I look at them.
But what about your devy pick? How would you sell that?
Yeah, so the devy pick, when you're looking at how you sell devy, well, that's a little easier because people always buy into freshman hype in the incoming freshman class. And so you can generally like a guy like Arch Manning is a guy that's this year's like, yeah. So like early on, Arch was, going 101. Now his devy value, like in the last mock I did, was at 204. So you've seen the fluctuation there. So like for me, when I'm looking at devy picks, like you can sell devy picks a lot easier because people always believe they can pick the next Patrick Mahomes. They can pick that next guy. And that's how I value it. And value, yeah, if it's separate, if it's just a devy, those definitely hold more value. I treat those almost like I do regular first, just because of the perceived value that people think they're getting on their roster. That's kind of how I look at it.
We have 2 very clear different strategies to a devy league, which I see playing. I'm a win now draft, always have been, and I use my picks as value for other assets potentially. I'm not worried about drafting players. I'll use them as assets. Then there's some guys that will go out there and they'll obtain, in a 3-round devy league draft, they'll go and pick up 15 picks and just flood themselves with rookies and hope the hit rate comes through, I guess. There's 2 very different strategies and approach to it.
There is. I tend to go with what you talk about, how you do your strategy. And the reason why is because, like I said, nobody else wants to win, and you you can create that value there. And I don't recommend. You can do the strategy you're talking about. It's very hard to do, and you really got to hit right. Like you'd have to really make sure you hit on those picks. But yeah, I tend to just always like if I collect assets, when I draft a devy player, there's a 99% chance that dude's not going to be on my roster by the time he's a rookie. Like 99% chance he's moving. Like I've already like this year I was able to shift like Malachi Nelson. I traded Malachi Nelson and like a depleted first for Dak Prescott, and I think it was what running back was it? Maybe DeAndre or someone like that. I needed the help and I needed that value. And Malachi Nelson, while he plays at USC, could be really good. We don't know. For 4 years, we're not sure what that's going to look like. And so, yeah, I'm on your board. That's how I treat devy. Like, and that's how I treat it. I just treat it an extension of dynasty, but without valuing devy picks very highly in terms of my personal preference, but use people that really do value them high to win leagues. That's how I do it.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Sorry, Hannah. I'll let you get back to the plan schedule.
No, don't apologize at all. I'm actually going to jump in now. I'm sorry, we've got going. So I'm just really interested because I love the idea, of what you're saying in terms of basically you don't really value picks that much. What kind of happens? Like, obviously, you potentially sell them for some stud players. Great. They will be on your roster, hopefully for a decent period of time. But what happens when your roster starts to kind of age out a little bit? How do you then, when you potentially don't have as many rookie picks because you've traded them away, how do you kind of then youth your team a little bit so it's a bit more balanced?
So I love that question. I think there's a market inefficiency right now. You can manipulate the market right now on mid-tier older veterans that can still produce at high levels that are cheap. So like guys like, for example, I'll give you Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon is a guy that no one wants on their roster right now. And so he's going really cheap. I saw him go for the 208 in a devy dynasty combined trade recently. Joe Mixon could have like a Fournette 2-year stretch where you're like, hey, I can value him. And so like the way I do it, to be honest with you, I've never go full rebuild like youth. Like I never built through that. I call it retooling essentially. So like all I do is retool and look for those 2 to 3 year assets no one wants. It's like the I don't know if you've watched like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the Island of Misfit Toys. That's my shit. That's my area. Like I'll go get the Misfit Toys in Dynasty, and I'll just retool all those dudes. Like even Javonte right now is like a 24 asset. He's not that. He's pretty cheap in terms of that. So I go look and I just kind of retool. And I don't necessarily look to get super young. I just look for those age cliffs because there are dudes out there and managers out there that literally live by age cliffs. Running back 25, they're dead. I'm out. Like I'm not touching them. Okay, I'll take the 25 and 26-year-old Nick Chubb that has 1,400 rushing yards when he's 25. I'll take that on my roster. Wide receivers 27, they're done. Okay, I'll take 28, 29-year-old Amari Cooper or however that works, and I just flip them that way and retool. But I will say this: I always try to. So if you're looking at your roster, you want as many, like if you go to like our ADP or dynasty rankings at Football Guys or wherever you're looking at, to me, I want 4 elite assets in the top 20. So if I can find that I have 4 elite assets in the top 20, that team's going to be a contender. How do I get there? Let me consolidate some of my bottom picks. So when people reload and retool, like you were mentioning, what they'll do is they'll sell like a Jamar Chase, $1 Jamar Chase for like 5 nickels. Because they think collecting as many assets as they can is the way to rebuild. Where I'll take those 5 nickels and in a pick and go get a tier up player and go get that area. So like that's kind of how I look at dynasty and retooling and essentially kind of the value. And you never want to let your roster age out too much, but there also is value to holding on to guys that are just going to die on your roster. So Cooper Kupp, Kelsey, some of these guys that you're just like, Chubb is kind of getting into that category as well. Like that guy's like, hey, I'm going to ride you out and have that production, but then I'm going to hit on a couple of these devy picks or a couple of these rookie picks, especially at that running back position, to where I know that I have a day 2 guy that can fill in, and there's always value to be had there.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I don't know if you've got anything else to say on that.
No, the only other thing is I play Dynasty in, say, 3-year hits. I think you mentioned it in that last answer there. I'm always looking at 3-year value cycles. Is that the same with devy? Do you take that same 3 years, or do you extend that slightly?
So the way I would look at it in terms of, I mean, dynasty cycles, 3 years is there. I mean, you could even shorten that to 2 years if you wanted, just because of the way the value shifts so much. As far as devy goes, I mean, I don't even really look at like 3 or 4 years out, because in college, look at DJU. He was the QB1 for 2, and then all of a sudden now he's on a roster. So, I almost look at like every devy asset as a 1-year asset. Like, it just, what can I use him for this year? How can I use him to win? Because I'm not playing college fantasy, so I really don't care if Gibbs has 2,000 yards rushing. Okay, Gibbs is looking like he's trending to be a day 2 guy. People really love him. All right, how do I use...
hoping your devy picks do is basically move up within the tiers whilst they're in college.
Increase
in value at that
and increase in value. And then if I need to ship them, I can. Or you look and you try to, you can't keep them. Like, I have a few teams that have Bijan, but the reason why is because I built my team to be ready for Bijan. And that's how I kind of look at it. So devy, strictly to me, it has nothing to do with college. So, like, you cannot even like college and play devy, because if you just manipulate the values, that's where it's at. This isn't about college production. That's why, like, for example, I know I'm talking a lot, but Blake Corum from Michigan, he's a running back from Michigan. He's an elite college back. I'm a Michigan fan. I love Michigan. I love Blake Corum. That dude is not getting day 2 draft capital. There is just, I would be shocked if he got day 2 draft capital, but he's being talked about as being like the running back 1 in some circles, and like the top and a day 2 guy. That's the kind of guy I would move off my roster. But if you didn't do it by last year, you probably missed the boat of getting that best value. And those are the type of things you have to look at.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it kind of does also relate to dynasty, doesn't it? Like you say, it is all about, looking at basically asset and share management, isn't it? So when is the peak value of this player? If I don't want him on my roster, I should sell him now. When is the low value of some players? I think it's going to rise. I should put them on my team. And a lot of it is asset management, isn't it, basically?
It is. I mean, Lewis spoke about it last week. As much as it is, and it's about getting value and, where possible, selling high and buying low, people do that so often they forget to win. And that's what frustrates me about Dynasty, is there's so much asset collection that you can go and win leagues sometimes just by being a little bit tuned in to trying to win it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, let's get back on track to the 2024 class, shall we? Really awesome chat there. I really enjoyed that, and that's going to probably spur me to look at doing some stuff with my dynasty rosters, and probably value my rookie picks a bit less and see what I can get to go and win.
I'm going to go and sell my Arch Manning share that I've got, because Kevin's going to keeping him. So.
All I'm going to say is I did manage to win my only devy league last year, so I was well pleased with that.
Nice.
We were having a chat before you came on, Kevin, and we just asked you if you wouldn't mind bringing to us 2 players from each position that you think that dynasty managers should be aware of going into kind of this season. Keep an eye out for them, and ones that are going to be coming out in 2024. So shall we start with the QBs? You obviously mentioned one of your guys already, Caleb Williams, the quarterback from USC. That's right, isn't it? Am I right?
Yeah, yeah, you are.
Look at me go. I think, to be honest, pretty much every dynasty player has heard his name and knows something about him. So I think, as I say, we had a kind of little quick discussion about him earlier. So kind of diving in a little bit deeper, Kevin, what do you think of him in terms of, I suppose, where you think he would potentially slot in if he came out now within those NFL QBs?
Yeah, let me. So one thing we do on our Patreon, we actually have combined devy dynasty rankings up to 150 quarterbacks, 200 running backs, 20 wide receivers. So we already have it for everybody out there. So I have Caleb right now as my quarterback 9. So he's in the tier. So I have Fields at 6, Lawrence at 7, and Jackson at 8, and that's kind of a tier to itself. And then at number 9, I have Caleb Williams, and he's ahead of Kyler, Deshaun, Anthony Richardson, and Dak. So he's kind of in that tier. But if he gets at the 101, you could easily maybe move him. We'll see what Fields does this year. We'll see what Lamar does. I'm expecting a big season for Lamar. But to me, he's already a top 9 dynasty quarterback in terms of value. And that's one of those things. the reason why too, if you look at like Caleb and you're looking at, if you want to know, like Lincoln Riley, quarterback at USC, all he does is just produce fantasy QB1s. Kyler, Jalen Hurts, like you go through the list. Baker Mayfield was good for a little while. Like when you're looking at overall 1 picks and what they do, he does all that. Elite accuracy, really good leader, really good arm, puts up great numbers. I mean, when they talk about it, I mean, everybody says Patrick Mahomes is what he is, but essentially he's the best quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck in terms of what we've seen from him and what he can be. I think the biggest thing is the knock. If you want to knock anything on him, I think sometimes his mechanics get a little wonky because he tries to do so much and he doesn't throw it away. There's little areas of his game, nuances there. And the size thing, 6'1", 215. Some guys will knock that, but Bryce just went number 1 and he's 5'10", 190 pounds. So like Caleb's going to get there. But he's about as sure thing as a devy quarterback can be. And then as far as a dynasty asset, he's the only one in that top 15 right now in college that I would have him in the top 15 in dynasty.
So basically, if we were going to have the 24 rookies came out today, he would be the 101.
Yeah.
Undisputed at this point.
Undisputed. I don't see any way that unless you took Marvin Harrison Jr., but in Superflex, he's going to be the 101 and Marvin Harrison Jr. be the 102.
Yeah. As I say, everything I've heard generally has been positive from him, about him in terms of what he potentially is coming into the NFL as and what he could potentially be. I'm really interested, how much of a dual threat is he, Kevin? Is he one of those dual threat guys, or, is it more he kind of rushes when he really has to?
He probably a little bit of both. So he had like 650 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns last year on the ground. I would put him at like, he's not going to be Kyler or anything like that, but maybe like Deshaun Watson. Like if you wanted to kind of get like a comp for rushing style and kind of what he can do, like he'll be over probably the 400-yard mark, but you're not, and he's going to score some rushing touchdowns. That's what probably entices people for him as fantasy too, because he's going to have a little bit of that rushing threshold on top of what he can do with his arm. So yeah, he's in the middle. I wouldn't necessarily classify him as like a dual threat kid, but he definitely has a better understanding of what he needs to do. It's a big joke on our show for football guys that we do, because a few years ago I got in a big old argument with a bunch of people on Twitter. Shocking, I know that Twitter is a cesspool. But they were trying to say Sam Howell was a dual threat kid because Sam Howell almost ran for 1,000 yards in North Carolina's offense. And I was like, no, he's not dual threat. Sam Howell is not a dual threat kid. Just because you look at the box score does not mean that he's going to be able to produce. And I got a lot of hate for that. Now we see that Sam Howell, he's not a dual threat kid. I would put Caleb in the middle. Like he's not Howell. He's not going to be Murray. He's going to be that Watson type mold where he's going to score touchdowns on the ground, but that's not going to be like a significant part of his game.
Yeah.
So was there an argument to say that Drake may be a bit more fantasy relevant with the rushing upside there potentially?
I think he's just like Howell because of that system that they play in and like the design runs and those type of things. Like, I think Drake is a little under him as far as a rusher. I think that he has deceptive speed and all that.
I had seen a bit of Cam Newton in Drake May sometimes.
He has functional athleticism. Like he does. And it's funny too, when you watch
he's a big guy as well.
Yeah, he's a big kid. And when you watch a tape on him, it's hilarious because like he'll make someone miss. And I'm like, how the hell did he make that dude miss? Because it looks like me with my kids. Like, how did that happen? He has that ability. Drake May from North Carolina quarterback. The thing about May is that I don't think he's as polished passer as Williams. So like May's got to improve his passing. I think there's a little bit of mechanic stuff with him that he's got to definitely improve. That's why he's a little bit of a tier below. But yeah, both are really good. Both those quarterbacks are good.
Fantastic. So is Drake May the second quarterback you was coming on to talk about, I presume, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Drake, see him what, top 8, top 10 of an NFL draft?
Yeah, I think right now, if you're projecting Drake May, I think it depends because I think with the position being it's a tough position where they're trying to refill and retool there. I think he could sneak into the top 5. I have him as a top 14 guy right now, just because I'm
have him as a starter coming in day one.
Yeah, I think so. I think he can be. He's got to develop as a passer. There are some areas where it makes me a little bit nervous. I think him coming from a North Carolina system. Now they have a new offensive coordinator this year, so you're going to see a new area get kind of there. And that was a big thing. I don't know if like NIL in college is essentially it's a free agency that's going to pay people. Drake May was getting a lot of offers, and May's big thing, he came back to North Carolina, but he told Mac Brown, the head coach, I need you to develop me for the NFL. I need a better offense coordinator. And he did that, and they brought him in. So he knows he's got to improve that. As far as like where I have him right now in Dynasty, I have him as QB 18 overall in my Dynasty devy rankings. So he's around like Tua in that area, like in terms of like where I would value him, because I do think we miss on these quarterbacks a lot in college. But if he develops fine, I think he's going to be a top 10 pick. Like if he develops his passing, that. And plus, QB3 in this class is anybody's guess. There's a ton of quarterbacks after these two. So that's definitely going to push up his value a little bit, because NFL teams are going to need a guy like him.
I think Drake May, for me, someone that Andy Richardson done it this year when he gets to the combine and actually starts showing some athleticism away from a field, I think could actually increase in people's estimations.
Yeah, no, 100%. He definitely could. And I think that, and if he does what he did last year and he improves, I think the biggest thing last year that we saw him kind of struggle down the stretch, last 3 or 4 games did not look great. I highly recommend your listeners, if you go to YouTube, QB School is a really cool resource. I'm in his Patreon. It's one of the ones I pay for. He breaks down these guys in depth on film, and he has a great one on May. It's free. If you go watch that, you can kind of see some of the things he does well, some things he doesn't. And so like, that's where, a lot of that analysis comes from, is guys like that. They're much smarter than me at quarterback position. But as a whole, I tend to be a little bit more cautious with the quarterbacks.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I totally get that, because my slight concern often is landing spot. Obviously, these guys are going high up in the draft to usually, although recently we've had a lot of trades and things where people have ended up, going up to get these QBs, but often they're going into these kind of bad teams, and then they're expected to produce coming straight out of college. And I think sometimes that can affect them and, ruin their confidence, and they just don't develop, and we don't see their full potential. So I also always feel a little bit nervous about QBs, and I think, where they go and what support they get when they get into the NFL has a massive kind of impact on how well they ultimately do in the league.
Yeah, if Urban Meyer's your head coach, right? Like, I think I think it matters. So like, Anthony Richards is a perfect example. Goes to Steichen's offense now, and like, that's a perfect built offense for him. Like, oh, okay, he went to a spot where they're not going to make him something he's not. They're not going to make him a, in the pocket passing quarterback, whatever the case may be. I think that matters. So stylistically and understanding how schemes are going to work, I think you hit it on the head, Hannah. Like, I think the number one mistake I see dynasty managers make year in and year out, we talked about it, football guys, is they don't understand that schemes change. And every year, like, we're projecting a lot of these guys, and then like, we're looking at quarterback landing spots and all this stuff, but they never look at the scheme. How does it fit? And where does these quarterbacks fit into, and the weapons around you and everything. Like, Lawrence is a perfect example. Didn't have a great scheme, didn't have a great coach, didn't really have the weapons. They did that last year. They gave him more weapons this year. We should see that improve. Fields, same thing. Like, that's why I'm actually kind of like what Carolina's done for Bryce. Why we can laugh about those weapons that they have, and they're not that great. They're still better weapons than we saw Fields have the last 2 years. Like, so they are still trying to build around him. So yeah, you want to get Caleb or Drake or these guys to get to a spot where they're going to elevate their strengths and really build around them. But we have seen the NFL, most good franchises are starting to like realize that. So you're starting to see them develop in there. But I think that is the case. But as far as like, how much does it affect both of these guys? I think Caleb's talent is always going to outweigh that. So he's going to go 101. I think where the question becomes is like, Drake May, where does he land? And then where does Marvin Harrison Jr. land? And where are you comfortable taking it at 102 if they could both get top 10 draft capital?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was kind of going to mention, which you've just said. You can see with Trevor that his talent kind of means that he kind of managed to weather the storm of that first year, and has come through and is showing now that he has, got the talent and can play. Whereas I think some of the less talented QBs probably then they struggle, they lose confidence, and then they just don't develop. Even if you get them into a better system, they've kind of lost that confidence in themselves. And I think it does have a big factor. Obviously, I've never played NFL QB, but I assume that confidence, is a massive part of the game, right?
Yeah.
You're one of the main guys on the field. You've got to distribute the ball. If you're not confident in yourself and where you can put it, then how is anyone else going to be? So really great convo on those QBs, really interesting. Should we have a look at the running backs? You've again mentioned this one slightly earlier, Kevin. Trayvon Henderson was your first choice discussion. Now, I don't, my knowledge isn't fabulous of college football, but am I correct in saying that he had a few injuries last season, and that kind of has dinged his kind of value a bit? Would you say?
Yeah, he had a broken bone in his foot. So he had like a lower foot ankle injury that pretty much nagged him the whole year. So that's why you saw his production dip a little bit. He only had 500 yards rushing last year. As at his freshman year, as compared to that, he had 1,200 yards rushing and 15 touchdowns, and was really a receiving threat, 300 yards receiving. So that's the big knock on Henderson. He did not look good last year. He was injured, but even when he wasn't injured, prior to that, he struggled running the football inside and hitting his zones and trying to his vision. So like, that's what people you're going to hear are kind of looking at too. But to me, he's still a running back one in the class. It's just that the tier is now closer. So you have a lot of guys in that tier now. He wasn't able to kind of, elevate above those guys last year like we were expecting.
What, in terms of how, I guess, his play style, how would you say that Trayvon plays? What are the positives and negatives about his style? Mainly for people like me and probably some of the dynasty players that just haven't had a chance to dig into the college game yet. What kind of asset would we be getting if we picked him as the first RB onto our team?
Yeah, so Trayvon, I mean, the biggest thing with him is his speed. Like he's one of the faster running backs in terms of like what he did in high school. So when he was dominated there, plus the weight, like he was a high, sub 11 time in the 100 meters during high school, and that's something to look at when you're scouting and trying to figure out where these guys are at. I think that of this class, he's probably the best receiver outside of maybe Donovan Edwards. Donovan Edwards is probably the best, and you have Trayvon there. And then lateral agility, like as far as just like as a football player, he covers all he checks those boxes: speed, receiving, lateral agility. And when he was coming out of high school, he was comped by 247 Sports to Christian McCaffrey. So that's kind of was his comp. Now I wouldn't necessarily put him in that elite tier, but that's kind of what he can do as a receiver and rusher. The biggest thing we need to see from him this year: durability, stay on the field, and in between the tackles. Like that's the key. Like, can he show that he has the frame? He's 5'10", 215, 220. There's rumors that he's almost up to 225. And if he can keep that weight with that speed, now we're talking about like a Saquon Barkley type level asset. If he doesn't do that, that's when you get a little bit concerned because of that durability between the tackles, those type of things.
Do you think he could profile us that 3 down back, or do you think that he's a bit more limited?
Oh no, he's a 3-down guy. So if he gets day 2 capital, or somehow sneaks in round 1, or whatever the case may be, if he has a good year, no, he's a day 3 workhorse. So like that's the other thing. You're looking for workhorses now because there's not a lot of workhorses out there. Henderson's a workhorse, and that's what excites you about him as a prospect.
It's your second name on the list. I was excited to see Raheem Sanders.
Yeah. Raheem, so like I really struggle with Raheem, so I'll be very, I'm going to be honest with everybody out there, because both of these guys literally flipped their freshman and sophomore years. Raheem, his freshman year, 500 yards rushing, kind of looked okay. Then his second year, he had over 1,400 yards in the SEC last year and looked absolutely dominant. So, and he's 6'2", probably 235. This kid is massive. So if you're looking for like a bruiser guy, red zone, that's what you're looking at there. So he checks those boxes: production, size, speed. Like he has that. I wouldn't necessarily say long speed, but in general, long speed's overrated when we're looking at prospects at the NFL side.
He's a quick accelerator, right?
Yes, very quick accelerator. And when this dude comes downhill, he's gonna just knock you on your ass because he's big. He's just not. He's not gonna have that. So he has that. I think. Excuse me. From a profile standpoint, the holes you can plug into him is receiving. Not really like a pass catcher. Like he can get dump offs and those type of things, but pass catching is really a struggle.
Okay, so it's kind of a C- Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like he's probably like a little bit more athletic, just from a college standpoint, not the NFL, but like his lateral agility struggles sometimes. Like, what is he going to be moving forward? Some people have him as running back 1. I think that's a size thing. They really like that size, that production that he's been able to do. I will say this though: if he produces this year, if he has a 12 to 1400-yard year again, and Travion struggles, Raheem's probably going to be running back 1. Like, that's kind of how you look at like where that's going to be. Because if he can duplicate his season, he was pretty efficient last year too. 6.5 yards per carry, efficiencies numbers, elusive rating was really good, according to PFF. So like Henderson's that type of guy, or excuse me, Sanders that type of guy that you're like, oh yeah, maybe he could be that Derrick Henry type guy, in moving forward, and he get that workload. But like to Hannah's point about Henderson's more of that 3-down guy because I think he has more of a athleticism, receiving chops, those type of things. Raheem, if he's going to be Henry, he has to get that volume to be that elite fantasy asset.
Just quickly, there's one other running back that I really like in this class, and it's Will Shipley.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter than these guys that we've mentioned. They're both big old backs, but I think Shipley's got a bit more elusiveness and pace about him.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought him up because like I feel like I'm the only one on Will Shipley Island. I think he's undervalued right now. The thing with him, like he is, again, pass catcher, burst, elusiveness. Those are 3 things I highlighted in my notes. The thing with him is like I think he plays a really bad offense. Now they have Garrett Riley. We're gonna see an improved offense this year at Clemson. So he just didn't really have that offense to kind of do it, but he did. He looked better last year. 1,100 yards, 15 touchdowns on the ground. He does those things. I think the question for me with Shipley is what is his athleticism? What is that RAS score going to be? And what's his 40? Yeah. And if he can hit that, then yeah. But as far as value goes, I mean, he went as late as late third in a mock that we did recently. I'll smash Shipley all day at that. So that's the value thing that's a little different for him.
Fair enough.
Let's shimmy on to the wide receivers. Again, we mentioned him earlier, Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah.
What about him makes him basically the 102 in this draft behind Caleb Williams? Is it just that he can do everything, or what are his special skills?
Everything. I would say if I had to put 3, like, okay, this is what he does well. Ball skills is to manipulate to move his body and just catch it in all different angles. Elite eye discipline. So, and he's going to bring it down. Size 6'4". He was 205. And the crazy thing that people don't get is that this dude put 30 pounds of muscle on in college. So from his freshman to sophomore year, or kind of his senior year of high school to now, he's at 205, 210. He came in at Ohio State at 180. And he put on some, and it didn't hurt his speed or anything like that. So, like, he got in that weight room and just worked. Probably the best footwork in college football. So off the line, create separation. This dude is just special. He should be because his dad was elite footwork, Marvin Harrison, like that area. Yeah, and I think the thing that makes him probably excited as a prospect is you probably haven't seen a ceiling yet, which is scary, which should be scary to like people in the Big Ten and those things. Like, I don't think we've seen Marvin Harrison Jr.'s ceiling, and he should have won the Biletnikoff last year. He didn't, but he's probably easily the top number 1 wide receiver in the country. And I think just based on a dynasty perspective, where everybody has him, NFL GMs love him, going to be a top 10 pick, if not top 5. So like, I think that's the thing that you have to like about him.
Yeah.
If you put him into the mold of a current player, who would it kind of be for you?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
I've got a DK Metcalf meets Mike Evans.
Yeah, I like that.
The
I
athleticism, the height and the build and the deceptive speed. I've kind of got that.
Yeah. What's scary is he might actually have like Garrett Wilson's athleticism too, but he's also 6'4". Like, that's the scary part about Marvin Harrison Jr. is like, I do like the Mike Evans comp with DK because of size, speed, and like his ability to go up and catch, but he might have a little bit more athleticism than that. That's what makes him so exciting as a prospect.
Yeah. Is that good?
Yeah.
Now, I'm really excited to talk about the second wide receiver because I have him on my devy team. So I'd like you to tell me, Kevin, what about Xavier Worthy is going to make him a dynasty asset or make
You just got to sell him. We've told you that already.
I know, this is why I was like, let's find out about him so that I can sell him to my league mate.
So basically, you want Kevin to hype him for you for the other 11 players in your league so that you can go and get more value, right?
Exactly.
So like Xavier, for me, I am as my wide receiver 3. Who I didn't put on the sheet was Emeka Ibuka from Ohio State. I'm a Michigan fan. I can't talk too much Ohio State in one show. But Xavier is the guy that could really pop off and be the wide receiver 2 of this class. So his freshman year, he efficiency numbers and analytic numbers, he had some of the best numbers in the country as ever for freshman wide receiver. Travis May dives into this stuff, and he was talking about it recently. Like, he was off the charts. And then last year he had a broken hand. So we saw a lot of drops. We saw a lot of inefficient play. Quinn Ewers was banged up, didn't really have a backup. So we saw him struggle last year. So he's kind of dipped a little bit into the rankings. But as far as a prospect goes, yak, footwork, explosiveness, and he's just small. So like, he's anywhere between 163, 173 right now. The size thing to me, though, based on this year's draft class and how we saw these smaller guys get drafted with day 1, day 2, and early day 3 capital, it makes me less concerned with Xavier, but he definitely could have a huge year. So like, I did a Texas wide receiver breakdown on our YouTube channel and looking at all these guys, and from just a value standpoint and what he could be going in the wide receiver 2, maybe, I think that teams might really like that. We saw what, like, Baltimore taking Zay Flowers and that with the 22nd pick. Like, that could have been easy Xavier Worthy, right? Even if he didn't have that year, because last year Xavier Worthy was probably a little bit better than Zay in terms of like efficiency, not necessarily overall box score production. But that's kind of with Xavier. I think that he could step up. He's going to be healthy. I think that offense is going to be better. They have more pieces around him. So Xavier is one of those like risers for me based on value this year that we could be like, oh yeah, of course he's wide receiver 2. That's crazy. Like, oh, he went top 20. That wouldn't shock me. But if he has more drops, he struggles kind of with like his inconsistent production this year. If Texas isn't back, like, they're never back. But if they really struggle, then yeah, you'd be worried about it. But I do think he's a hold in devy right now, because I do think his value is kind of low on the lower side, to where if he has a few good games coming out of the stretch with Texas, they do good against Oklahoma in the rivalry game, that's when his value is probably going to be the best.
Noted. The only, I guess, quick question I have on that before we move on is, do you think that how these kind of smaller wide receivers that came out in this draft class, how they perform will kind of dictate a little bit where Xavier Worthy goes, or how they value him in next year's draft?
I think it all depends on the offensive system. We're seeing a lot of 12 personnel now. And so like the biggest thing is like, I think that I think Zay went a little earlier, and even Addison to a point, because they can play inside and out. So like they can play on the out. Like Zay Flowers can play on the outside. He might look like a slot guy and they might just use him there, but I do think that they can move these guys around because I think they're versatile. I think that's the question with Worthy. Is he an out guy? Can he play on the out? Can he play that X, Y, whatever the case may be? Or is he just going to be in a slot? That's the question that you have to ask yourself with Worthy. I think right now he more projects as a slot. So then, yeah, that's going to narrow his teams down to where who can use him in that slot if they're going to go to that route. But if he can maybe do it, yeah. And I think they're always going to look at that production. But we are seeing NFL teams using smaller guys because that's just the nature of offenses now. We saw, we're seeing it in college and they're coming into it. We are seeing more 12 personnel, but the reason for that is because NFL teams just have small linebackers now because they needed them to cover all these slot guys and stay with these smaller tight ends. And so we're going to see a shift back to that. So a guy like Worthy and some of these other guys are going to get valued because they're always going to be able to manipulate matchups. So it's just like that ever flowing evolution of the game.
Yeah, really interesting, and I'm interested to see how he performs this season, see whether I can sell him, or maybe if he performs really well, keep him on my team. Let's talk about another guy that we mentioned earlier, the tight end Brock Bowers. So Kevin, you were saying that you have some reservations on him. Kind of what are your thoughts? Why are you a bit kind of nervous about him compared to some other analysts and people in the industry?
So, okay, I'm gonna get canceled because like everybody loves Brock Bowers, and so like I like Brock. Brock to me, like even in my dynasty rankings, my combined rankings, I still have Brock as a top 7 guy, like in dynasty and devy. But I think 6'4", 230 worries me a little bit because I do think that he struggles in press coverage. And I do think he struggles with separation. And I think that Todd Monken's offense really highlighted his strengths. But that offense kind of highlights every tight end strength that we've seen. I just worry about the size. But I also, here's the thing. If you're in a startup and you're drafting Brock Bowers, I've seen him go as high as 104. You're really missing out on some like legitimate pieces at running back, wide receiver, or even quarterback position. So for me, Bowers is a stay away because like, look at Laporta. Sam Laporta was not getting drafted last year in devy drafts. That dude got drafted as the tight end 2 in the NFL draft ahead of Michael Mayer. And you were taking Michael Mayer probably where you're taking Brock Bowers right now. And that's how I kind of look at the value. I think that's where my hesitation is. Now, if you have him, you're probably pretty excited because he's probably going to be a top 10 tight end coming out. And you probably didn't necessarily need to use top 8 draft capital for him. So that's really where my hesitation lies. As far as a receiver, when you're looking at everything like adjusted receiving yards per team pass attempt, that's something that's really good. You want to kind of be at that 1.0. He's at almost 3.0. Experience weighted dominator rating. He hit his dominator rating for 2 straight years. His adjusted dominator rating. So essentially dominator rating, just receptions, touchdowns. How does that all market share tie into it? And he was ahead of Kyle Pitts, Bowers, Ingram, all guys that were there. And we'll see that. But people don't realize that like Michael Mayer's dominator rating was almost 0.37 so this last year, and he still was tied in 3 because of that athleticism question. And that's the same question I have for Brock. Where's that athleticism going to be?
Yeah, good job we're in England and no one's really listening, isn't it, Kevin?
So let's move on to our second tight end, Ja'Tavion Sanders. I have to admit, I know absolutely nothing about him. So happy to hear whatever you think about him, Kevin. And
I don't think either of us are tight end fans, are we, Hannah? Particularly.
No, I mean elite or none, right?
Yeah, they're all none.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep it quick for him. I don't really necessarily like any tight ends in devy. So like, I'm a very
Hannah made you put 2 on the sheet, right? So
yeah, if you maybe put 2 on the sheet, but also like. To me, I'm very anti-quarterback and anti-tight end in devy because I think that the values just don't match up, and you miss out on so much. Like I only have 3 quarterbacks that I would take in a devy draft right now, and I only have 1 tight end. I'm taking Brock. That's it. I don't care. Like, and I wouldn't even take Brock right now based on his value, how high he's going. Ja'Tavion is just a big kid, so it's like what you're going to do for this, you're going to project. Athleticism, 6'4", 250, playing with Quinn Ewers in Texas, was kind of a target hog last year, had like 75 targets, 54 catches, 613 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And you're expecting that bigger bump for production style. They have added to that wide receiver room, though, so maybe his receiving yards go down, but maybe his efficiency in the red zone goes up. He had a few drops, but for him, you're just projecting 6'4", 250, and is pretty athletic freak. And you're like, oh, okay, maybe he can kind of step in there and get day 2 capital.
Yeah, I'm just really interested. Sorry, I know we're going on, but I just have to ask this question before we move on. You were saying obviously you're not that keen on taking I can see why tight ends. I think it's similar with us in rookie drafts. You know, I just don't see the value of taking them at that point. But in terms of quarterbacks in devy leagues, is that basically because there can be so much fluctuation in terms of kind of how they do and then eventually where they end up going in the NFL? Or I'm just intrigued on that kind of point.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just based on the miss rates that you see from the position, but also in Dynasty Startup, I'm getting 2 top 12 guys no matter what. So, like, I'm going to shore up the NFL side in my Dynasty leagues at the quarterback position to where I don't need to take a devy quarterback, and I'll let my other league mates reach on guys like that. And, like, I saw Michael Penix Jr. go in the 3rd round. I feel like that's a dead pick because 6-year kid that has injury history, while I'm taking a freshman running back like Justice Haynes, who could be the running back 1 in the 26th class. So I don't have to reach on the quarterback position while others might, right? And I think that's where it comes from. And the only 33 quarterbacks I feel comfortable drafting, May, Caleb, and then Drew Aller from Penn State, is because I think that they could be the QB1 or QB2 of their class, and their values pretty much align with what my values would be. But yeah, it's just really about miss rates. That's really where I'm at. Like, okay, they miss too much. I can extract other positions and other value at those spots.
Yeah, I think the variance in role between a college tight end and an NFL tight end is so different. It's almost a different job, essentially. There's a lot more difference, which is why we see the time it takes for general tight ends to progress into the league and become fantasy worthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I've just got one more question for you, Kevin, and then we will give you a bit of a breather. We do have a guest question for you too, but this is my last question on this 24 class, and that is, which player do you think that's not currently kind of on the dynasty radar that you think could play their way into rookie drafts in 24?
So there's a kid, and I'll keep it very I don't want to go too deep because then your listeners will stop listening. But there's a wide receiver at LSU. His name is Malik Neighbors. He projects he was much better than he was much better than Kayshon Boutte last year. He only had 3 touchdowns, but he had 1,000 yards, 72 receptions, 6'1", 195, and also. Helmet scouting is not a bad idea with some of these guys. LSU wide receivers, they tend to pan out. He looked really good athleticism-wise. As long as he doesn't get off-field troubles, he had some run-ins a little bit this offseason. I think he's going to project pretty higher than people think. And then real quick, Trey Benson from Florida State, running back. He's getting talked about a little bit buzz in this class, like running back 2, as high as that. He's got really good tape. So if he has a big year, those are 2 names to watch. Malik Neighbors, wide receiver from LSU, and then Trey Benson, running back from Florida State.
Your Neighbors are a proper deep threat, isn't he? From what I know of him.
Yeah, deep threat can kind of reminds me of I don't want to say Jamar Chase just because it's LSU, but kind of like a Jamar Chase, Evan Stewart type mold. Evan Stewart plays for Texas A&M. Good value where he's going right now, and could be the wide receiver 3 of the class. So when you're looking at could pop up, that's a kid that kind of comes to mind.
Cool.
So we've got a bonus player as well. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. So just before we go, Kevin, I'm sure you're parched because we've had you talking for basically an hour. With every guest we have on, we always ask them to pose a question to our next guest. We don't tell you what the question is before you come on, just to kind of have an answer that you kind of come out with straight away. So Lewis, the content creator for King Fantasy Sports, was our previous guest, and he posed the following question to you. Which wide receivers of the 2022 rookie class do you think will rise the most in value over the course of this season? And which player do you think may fall the most in value?
Oh, man. I think so. Player I think I don't want to say his name because I've been such a hater, but I think Treylon Burks is going to rise in value based on where he's probably going in Dynasty and where ranking wise. He's the number 1 guy. As long as his asthma is okay, he's going to get targeted, and you're going to see that. So I would kind of rank Treylon Burks as probably being that kid that definitely rises in value. The other one, as far as who's going to drop, I hate to say it, I think Jameson Williams might actually, because his value right now is still a top 16, 17 asset. And if he's not on the field that first 8 weeks, and if he struggles again after he comes back, or 6 weeks or whatever it is, his value is going to dip a little bit. Not saying I'm out on him, but you could see a very big fall there in terms of maybe finds himself outside the top 24, 25.
Like the monsters.
Yeah, I can totally see both of those happening. So, Kevin, we now ask you for a question for our next guest. It can be anything to do with Dynasty. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, I got a good one because this is a thing I'm on right now. So because Dynasty managers are such snobs and they hate running backs, you're seeing a big value shift to maybe going bully running back in startups. So is there a scenario where you feel like whoever's on next, where you feel like that you could go bully running back? So even in super flex leagues, let's say you draft 3 or 4 running backs after your quarterbacks or whatever the case may be, and you actually wait on wide receiver. Is that a kind of optimal strategy this year going into startups based on the values that you're seeing out there? And in my estimation, the wide receiver position is not as deep as people think it is. So maybe you can kind of, you can go the other way. You can essentially kind of go after running backs early rather than wide receivers.
It's a very interesting one. Looking forward to putting that to our next guest. So, Kevin, thank you so much. You and Dan have been having some nice conversations. I've basically bombarded you with lots of questions. But I'm really, really appreciative of you coming on. Please, before we go, can you remind everyone where they can find you, where they can find your rankings and your Patreon and everything like that? I would highly recommend kind of getting involved and getting over there and seeing your stuff, because there's loads of great content there.
Yeah, we do. So we have our devy royale Patreon, and essentially it's $3 a month. That's all it is. And we do devy dynasty rankings. So we have a bunch of them there. So it's an auto-populated sheet. So you get everything. You get our devy dynasty and combined rankings all in one. On top of that, we have the manifesto, which is like a 350-page breakdown of every Power 5 team, depth chart, players to watch, stuff like that. A Discord. We have podcast only Patreon episodes. We have all that stuff for our Patreon. And then you can also find our YouTube channel. So I do a lot of free devy content on there, and mocks and rankings and tiers and all those type of things to help you out with understanding player value. And that's at the Devy Royale YouTube channel. And if you enjoy college football, if you want to get to know a little bit about like maybe dynasty values compared to devy, I would highly recommend it.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Recommend everyone subscribe. I'm going to head over there right now. I think it's, even just playing Dynasty, not even necessarily devy, it's really useful to know who's coming up next, what college players we should be keeping an eye on, because it's all important, to us moving forward. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again, Kevin. We really appreciate it. Don't forget to check us out on Twitter, YouTube, and obviously your favorite podcast provider. And we will see you next week. So don't forget, keep rushing.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, guys.